this is the last session for today, and it's collecting the ideas of the SAPC, what Dan had introduced about how we work psychoanalytically, both in the consultant and taken out there, how we combine also as professionals and as organizations. And I think that we're all working in sometimes in silos, but and there sometimes is overlap, which you'll hear here. But I think that the more that we work together, the more we pool our resources, the stronger we're going to be as a professional organization working analytically, but also the further our outreach will be. And particularly now with the huge mental health problem that we have, and with the advent of the NHI, that we really need to be with what's happening in the country and in the mental health profession. So we've asked everybody, nobody knows what we're going to talk about here. So just to say this, we've not quite sure. We've not prepared everyone to have sort of 10 minutes, but each of these people here have been working in different settings with people. Lauren is coming to represent the IPC, Peach, as we've heard about her, and it's an organisation I also have been very involved in doing child therapy training through it. So she will talk to us, and we all got the programs of clinical psychologists in private practice. CD, I have sort of mentioned before, is an educational psychologist. She's the director called Alpania, and had a long association first with me through JPCCC, and we'll talk about the work that's been done in the community. June wears many, many hats, and has always been interested in facilitating early parent-child interventions. But she's coming and representing GAME, which is the Gauteng Infant Mental Health Organisation, which is and also had a very, very big conference last year for those who attended. And you've already been introduced, not last or least, so you'll be representing Wabeli, but there's also overlap in that your infant observation was done through IPC, which we presented.
And I was in the founding committee of GAME
as well.
So I think that's kind of the point.
So that's important. All these organisations have overlap, and all under the SAPC, the umbrella of the South African Psychoanalytic Confederation. So I think it's really important that we do meet and we talk and we find some way to collaborate today. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Laura.
I'm sorry, it's not been clear to me what I'm going to talk about. So I'll tell you a little bit about the IPCP, and then also what we've attempted around some research, or what we're trying to learn about how to do research. So the IPCP, I think, is made up of about 14 or 15 groups. Their study groups, their infant obs groups, their theory groups, and child education, child psychotherapy. And what happens is people actually, I think the idea was that if people did enough of the courses, they could get a qualification, but I'm not sure if that's ever happened. Do you know if it has?
They have been accredited here. So we were linked up with it, so that's all we're starting this conversation. So it was linked up to Tavistock came, and they've done all the they've done a lot of the early child psychotherapy training here, and had an accredited diploma with the Tavistock in child psychotherapy, which was the infant observation, child work, and the theory courses. So we're in the process, of changing that and getting a South African accreditation. But it's the only training that you have here that's psychoanalytic and has some, for children, or work with children.
Yeah. And then what we tried to do last year was to think about how to do research. And what we came to was that actually we need to understand policy. We need to understand what government's thinking, what NGOs are thinking, what people who make policy are thinking. So if you like, I'll just tell you a little bit of the policy, which sort of touches on the NHI, and then how we thought if you understand the policy, you could apply it to the work that we think we can do. So some of the policy was we drew from an advocacy document which came from the School of Public Health at UWC. And they looked at something called the National Development Plan from 2030, which aims to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. So this was a guide to follow, and the National Planning Commission, which drew up the NDP in 1994, I'm sorry I don't have a slide because it gets a bit confusing, as a guide for the country to follow, they identified a failure to implement policies and an absence of broad partnerships as the main reason for slow progress, noting that the public health system cannot meet demands for sustainable quality. In particular, the plan notes that the district-based approach to primary health care is foundational for the implementation of the NHI. So there are further policy papers which look at something called the ideal clinic, which is where the NHI wants to go to set up a clinic where there are many, many services, including psychological services. And it also almost sounds like the work we've heard here today is functioning in the place of the work that should be happening in clinics. But maybe, Mel, you might be able to add something about the clinical. I'll just tell you that in 2014, a number of foreign academics and local people got together and they drew up a declaration on mental health in Africa called Moving to Implementation. So they recognized that mental, neurological and substance use disorders constitute a high burden of disease, and that depression is a leading cause of disability throughout the world. So the declaration that they drew up called for acute and urgent action towards meeting mental health needs and emphasized integrating mental health into primary health care. So that always seems to me that it's at the front line, that it's perhaps community or community workers who are doing this quite often, home-based care workers who are really doing the initial psychotherapy or assessments of people. They addressed stigma and violations of human rights, and they pushed for advocacy research to focus on sustainability and scaling up of affordable services. I think I'm going to stop there, actually. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greetings to everyone. I was just listening into all the presentations and then see that there is a lot of overlap, but I came out with one statement in terms of understanding Kenya. Kenya as a family center, then for me, I was like, really, the way we work, we really are a family center, because I was like thinking of all the services that we offer. We are seeing parents, grandparents, couples, children, and also a bit of some nursery school crèches. And then when you look at all that kind of range of the people that we service, and then it boils down to one thing, that the source of them all, they are being brought together by a child. And then without parents or without adults, children then are not going to be able to survive what we wanted them to survive. And then when we look at a quote, I was also thinking of a quote here, Melanie Klein, when she said, all the sufferings of later life are for the most part repetitions of these earlier ones. And that every child in the first years of life goes through an immeasurable degree of suffering. So it is in this understanding that the Kanya Center continues to strive to create a therapeutic space for the under 12s and their parents. And also you remember Kanya also, as it became formally from the JPCC, it was during the time of the violence in the 1994. Kanya, it's in a way like saw it all, from the violence of the post-apartheid and progressed to the HIV and AIDS. As we speak at Kanya, we have now orphans that we also know that orphans without adults, they are carrying emotional trauma with them, which then is caused by various ills that they go through. And then now, if these orphans are unable to face their unbearable loss or not having a caring adult in their lives, then we also know what kind of a society we are facing. So then now, Kanya is working in different levels, although we are being challenged by funding. We are on the other level in a better position that the social development funds some social workers, and also at the same time also fund some food parcels, as you have also heard from other speakers earlier on, that it is a kind of a very painful, it does create a painful counter-transference as a therapist to want to work with a child, or even also adults, because the unemployment is rife in our area. Working with an adult that is also hungry. So then now the way we work, the model that we are using is we have caregivers that are volunteers. Then caregivers are assigned. Like for example, the point of entry at Kanya is a walk-in, and also people can phone or can walk in. And then also when they walk in, sometimes they can be seen the very same day when they walk in. Sometimes they can be given some appointment to come over. And then from there are some social auxiliary workers that are assigned some caregivers. And then some caregivers will then go to the respective families to do some audit, to see what is going on, what are the kind of the needs that the family is needing from our services. And then from that situation, they come back. On a weekly basis, we have what we call case conferences, where we sit and then we present the cases, and then we decide what cases that we can take and what cases that we can refer out. And then out of that, we see ourselves as Kanya Family Center presenting a containment that has a container of different levels, because caregivers will literally go to the families. And then say, for example, in that particular family, it's only children, or we call them child-headed families or granny-headed families. And in a child-headed family, already it says that there is no adult. And then our caregiver and then work as a substitute mother. And then they can also go as far as going to the school. If at school they need a parent, a caregiver can go and be a parent for that particular child. And then from that situation also, the very caregiver is the one, let's say perhaps maybe we get some old clothes or food or whatever. That particular caregiver that is assigned to that family will be able that to get some things that that particular family needs. And then also at the same time, we're not looking at the external needs of the family, we're also looking at the internal needs of the family. Then if then the children or whoever is in the family, they're needing emotional support, or maybe there are children there that are vulnerable, then we make them our priority to receive counseling. And then also if then it's grannies, that also the one that is heading that family, same thing is happening to a granny. Granny also gets a support. And then how do we go about with that kind of a support? Then they get into our systems, but we're not really working it in the way our other counterparts are doing, like maybe 3 months in the system. There are some families that have been there as long as I can remember. But then now, how is it being helpful to intervene at the level of the children, at the level of the teenagers, at the level of the grandparents, is because now it works as a system. Then now when every level gets support, then we believe that then the children will be able to be taken care of, because they need to be brought into counseling and they don't bring themselves. And then also working in the community, it's very much challenging because of the lack of the resources. We then as Kenya decided that we will include a school-based program. The school-based program, also similar with the organization, it is comprised of different care workers. You find your intern psychologist, social worker, or student social workers, your auxiliary social workers, plus also your caregiver. Say for example, in a school, a teacher is concerned about a particular child, and then a caregiver can visit that family. Although still that is a problem that I think as a group now that we are here, how can we involve adults? Because we know that yes, we're concerned with the first 2 years of life of infants, but then now they also do not bring themselves to us. Adults has to bring them to us. So then still adults, we need them. Then now at Kenya is the same with the other organizations. We're also struggling with the parents coming in, but then now we sort of like by way, finding them, because on a monthly basis they have to come for their food parcels. So what is happening during the day of them coming to get their food parcels, then they get to have their support group, and then they can choose a particular topic or maybe a concern that the caregivers have been identifying when they're visiting the families. And then a social worker will run, or a social auxiliary worker will run a particular program to address that common need or that common theme that has been identified. And then specifically then, how are we working with our under 12s? How are we working with the identified emotionally needy children? Then group play therapy came into being. We felt even if we're not specialists in it, but knowing very well that if you see a child in a play therapy room, the most important thing psychoanalytically is you're being there as an adult, spending time with that child, giving attention to that child for that 45 to 50 or to 1 hour. It means a world to that child. So from that model, we then transferred it to a group play therapy, which we also presented in the conference. So what is happening there, we believe that in group play therapy, the children that are attending it, they get an opportunity to create a world that moves away from fantasy to real life situations. Because the children that we're talking about are children that are vulnerable, orphaned, or are coming from families that are violent, or unemployed parents, or absent parents, or substance abuse parents. Then they do experience some anxieties about their day-to-day situation. So these kids in a play group therapy, they can also get an opportunity to face the reality in the midst of their peers, and knowing that they are not alone and then not the only one. And then the good enough feeling that they get of being around an adult who's willing to spend time. As you have heard from the other speakers, that if you spend time with a child, with whoever needs that kind of support, then change begins to happen. And then it also brings you hope and begin to trust that the world that they live in is not so persecutory, because you can imagine that emotionally you need it, also physically you need it, and there are also different ways that a child gets affected in a society where lots of unemployment is rife. And then also we know that it is in playing that the child is free to be creative and be able to be a child again. We do get some good feedback in different schools. With Kenya, we haven't reached a level where we can be able to see lots of schools. We only are seeing, I think, 4 schools, 3 primary and 1 high school. But in those schools, we do get a good feedback of the work that is done there, because it is done on a yearly basis. And then how we also see that Kenya is giving impact in those schools. Those that were working in the schools, if they leave those premises, we find that they get some good feedback, or even a gift, even big gifts. Then you can see that these people were really making a difference. So some children also, they can come out integrated in a way that they can understand and accept their situation. An example that I have that is still in my mind, of a child that was in a group, very much jealous of other kids that they have some toys and then he doesn't have a toy. And then eventually he was able to be creative in a way that in an external world was able to create, to get a brick and say, this brick is gonna be a truck. And my truck is not gonna have wheels, because it's gonna move swiftly on the ground. And then when you internally look into that, a truck is something that carries something, and a truck, it has wheels so that it can be viable. And then for him, a brick is like maybe something he has achieved, something that is solid that can even move without wheels. And then wheels will be without having whatever that the need may be at that time. And then in terms of just breaking a bit so that I can give others a chance, I would like to end with Freud's quote that says, "An unexpressed emotions will never die." So I see ourselves as working in the communities, we making sure that people that we service, we're giving them an opportunity to be able to express these emotions, because we know now that if these emotions are not expressed through play or through verbalizing, they will not die, and then they are buried alive and will come forth later in an unwanted ways. Then we cannot talk about that specifically in our country, what we have just experienced, where girls are abducted, small kids are killed, and all those kind of things. You can then see that some of the frustrations or unspoken emotions, then they come out in a way that it's shaming us or is embarrassing us as a country. I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Tsiki. June?
I am from the Gauteng Association for Infant Mental Health. It is made up of people that are interested in infancy, in early intervention. Right now, our association is multidisciplinary. There are some psychologists, social workers, we've got a chiropractor doctor, we have got a speech therapist, and we are open to anyone who is interested in infancy. Our mother body, the World Association for Infant Mental Health, hearing all the latest research on modern brain science and attachment, that through caregiving relationships, we do manage to build brains and minds. And that if you think that when infants are born, they come in with over 200 billion unconnected, very little connections between the neurons, and that actually how that connects is through the early experiences. That galvanizes people who are interested in this work like us to say, we have the information, and we know that between 0 and 3 years, when the brain is being built, we have got an opportunity to build the brains and what we put into those brains. We have got an opportunity by disseminating this information to people that see infancy or children and later adult human beings as mentoring to say, okay, what can we do? So our association really is born from all these interested psychodynamic first, psychoanalytic thinking people were the founders. And here I just want to go back to one of the quotations that we found. There was a woman, I think Selma Freiberg is still alive. She is one of the people that started working with mother-baby diets 30 years ago. And when she was asking for federal funding from the United States government, taxpayers were very angry. And they said, there is a crazy professor, and this crazy professor wants to put babies on the couch. Our money is not going to be spent on that. But we know that work is fanned out now, and that the WAME, our mother body, when I last counted in 2011, we had 52 affiliates. And I think that number has doubled now. And maybe briefly to just define what infant mental health is. Maybe there are some people who don't know about that. They say that it is the young child's capacity to experience, express, and regulate emotions, to form close and secure relationships, and explore the environment and learn. And I've since heard in one of the conferences that learning is not learning at school. It's learning, well, it includes that. First of all, you have to learn to be with your primary caregiver. And then from there you explore to learn to do, to learn at school and to learn other things. And all of these capacities will be best accomplished within the context of the caregiving environment. That includes the family, as we have heard, the community, the cultural expectations of young children. And developing these capacities is synonymous with healthy social, emotional development. It's actually more than that. Physical health is also included in that. And so we again, beginning here at Ububele, where the work on infancy was happening, and I think Ububele they started GAME. We elected a committee in 2012, And since that time, we've had a conference in 2015. It was actually quite interesting that the theme of that conference was bodies and minds of babies, multidisciplinary dialogues. We were having a dialogue with multidisciplinary professionals about babies. And what we know is that in the pre-verbal stage of infancy, babies feel things in their bodies. And we do know that most of those feelings emanate from the emotional brain. And that babies are born without the capacity to regulate or to manage their emotions. And I just want to refer back to what you're saying about how the kids in the boxing club, they've learned over time that with an adult other, they can begin to regulate their affect and they become calm. So we do know also that the traces of those emotions, they do get left in the bodies of our babies. And we do know also that when you do psychodynamic work, a lot of the time we are working with emotions and experiences from earlier on. But what we hadn't known so far is actually it happens 0 to 3 years. It's specific now. And so with that in mind, let me just quickly say what our aims are in the association and in our mother body. The mission is to promote the education and the research and the study of the effects of mental, emotional, and social development during infancy on later normal and psychopathological development. Okay. And that this body has got publications, conferences, they've got a website, as we do, and that the focus for us and them is to actually highlight that infancy, which is 0 to 3, is a sensitive and critical period in the psychosocial development of people. And therefore, as I said, we've got a window of opportunity to build healthy brains, healthy relationships, and we are all here worried about the state of our children, the state of our citizenship, the state of mental health, and we're saying if we can get it right now in infancy, early intervention, then we are raising citizens who are productive, who are compassionate, who are capable of making other people matter. And so with that in mind, the way that we have tried to sensitize communities and professionals alike is to having talks. Like the other day, last week, we had a talk on neonatal pain. How many people ever really think of when a baby is in hospital, in ICU? What does that pain do? Can we bear to think about the pain that babies have when they're in hospital? And so we had somebody speaking about that. But a major crowd puller that we had last year in August, on a cold night, we had about 80 people attending a talk by our own here South African affective neuroscientist, the father or the founder of Kangaroo Mother Care in South Africa, and he was talking about attachment and neuroscience and the skin-to-skin kangaroo mother care. And you might want to know that as we've had pockets of excellence being spoken about in here, Niels Bergman has been given a funding of over 6 million or something, and this funding is being administered by the WHO, just to say something of our own person here in infancy. And the funding is from the Bill Gates Foundation. It's being rolled out in South Africa, in Tanzania, in Malawi, in India, in Nigeria, and they are focusing on premature babies who are born at 1.8 kilograms in order to reduce infant mortality, which is currently standing at 20%, which is quite high. So as we go out and think about how to bring together all these 50 organizations and others, we do need to bear maybe in mind that there is already a lot that is happening in the public health system. We in the game, we are really looking for people to help us. We want to focus on policy. We want to advocate. We want to go on TV. We want to go, and I'm aware that TV has done a lot of TV presentations. We would like us to come together, to go on TV, to speak to local radio stations, and I think you do quite a bit of that, and writing articles in the newspaper about infancy, its importance and why we need to do it, and why maybe we need to go into our healthcare systems, because we do understand that postnatal depression is standing at 40%. And so I might then want to end this. I hadn't prepared as Vorna, you know. I do want to end with this. Some time back, somebody gave me an article on the evolution of childhood, going back many centuries. And this paper was written by a psychoanalyst, Lloyd Demause. I don't know how to pronounce that, Demause. And he studied what was it like to be a child, how has childhood evolved, obviously in the West, up to where we are now. And he demarcates one thing that I came out with is human beings, we have not been kind to children. I don't know the other way around. He moves through infanticide, where babies were killed, and all sorts of horrible things. But I'll jump the other 3 phases and come to where we are now. And he calls this period hope. It's the phase of hope now. I hear a lot of hope in this room here today, that something is being done, something is going to come together to further all that work that was started by Freud, carried through by other forerunners, to bring hope to not only to our nation, but to our neighbors as well. And so I want to leave it at that.
I feel,
Very powerful.
yeah, that feels quite mobilizing, June. I suppose I want to sort of just put back some rhetorical questions. Where is the forum for children under the SAPC? Is there something specifically about children? Because I think that there should be a specific forum. Is that body the IPCP that holds something on behalf of children in the 3 cities that the IPCP is present? And that's the one question. And then the other question, I think, is for us as psychologists, and I think that links to the idea of child work, including infancy, and what Lauren brought at the beginning. The policies are not the problem at all. We have progressive policies in this country. I think the advocacy has been effective in making change that's represented in our human rights, in the Children's Act, in the amendment to the Children's Act, in the National Integrated ECD Plan. The policies are all there, but they get stuck, as Lauren mentioned. And maybe today give us a bit of an idea of why. I think people are struggling so hard to sustain themselves and stay alive, that organizations that should be really working more like the model of the communities of care are not doing that. And I think for us to lobby more powerfully if we were to accumulate just these organizations we heard today and add up the numbers of beneficiaries and the different kind of programs that each of those organizations are providing services for, and leverage on the basis of that, we have a voice that can't not be heard. But the question for psychologists, I think, because there are so many, is what is our role in that? What is your role? What is psychology in South Africa at the moment? What does it mean? And I think that's got to be core to the question of the NHI. Is it a triage? There will never not be a place for individual work or group work. There will never not be a place. And in fact, a lot of the work around the desperate situation about levels of violence against women and children, there isn't something that's embedded in the system, in government, about addressing psychologically and therapeutically the needs of abused children and families. It hasn't been integrated into their plan. So there will always be a need for us, but is a percentage of our work that direct therapeutic work? Is a percentage of the work preventative care? Do psychologists have to be doing that? Is our role training other allied professionals or lay or child and youth care workers to be able to do that? This is part of what I think the SAPC has to urgently engage with, so that we're on the same page about the roles and responsibilities of the individuals and the groups that the individuals represent.
Yeah, just to also add on that, that also our voice in the country as psychologists is often not heard. Like these situations when they happen, and we cannot hear a comment from a psychologist commenting about this ill health that is being done to people. I think we're very quiet as psychologists. Maybe we need to start there and look at our role. At what level do we want to pitch? Because also with the NHI, it's like the very first draft. Psychologists were not part of that. And then we had to also, someone forced the way for psychologists to be in. Is as if in the country health it's medical, and then health is not mental.
I think that we all agree that that early intervention work is absolutely imperative. I mean, and we've got the proof for this at the moment, and we've got the organisations that provide the services. I mean, it's multifactorial in terms of the interventions that are needed. You can't have a child without a mother, without a family, without a school, without a community. And some kids, if they don't have parents, require a community to raise them. And we have organisations that are doing the services, providing services. I think it's important, as you said, I'm just underlining this, that we mobilise as a whole organisation. And it's very much in keeping what the SAP is hoping to do, and certainly what Dane wants to do, and to work, amongst organisations and multidisciplinary. So I'm just going to open it up now, and then some comments. We have about just under 20 minutes. Michelle?
I think just part of it is that this video, which I don't really want to be in terms of honest, but to use this video of the presentations for advocacy. I think it is one of the aims of the video as well. So it is starting to get it out there and to engage. Because I think we have got an NHR team engaging, but it needs more people that are prepared to speak on video and prepared to kind of come forward.
I don't know if I'm being defiant or adolescent about this, but it feels to me that the NHR, we might want to keep engaged with that, but it feels as if we're going to constantly be on the back foot, almost begging to be involved or trying to insert ourselves there when we're not really wanted, with various other economic or medical models that don't welcome maybe the way or the pragmatic approaches that we've had to develop, because they're complex. And I'm thinking that we could do what you were saying, is just consolidate what we are doing and just go forward. We are a microcosm of the mental health community, and this is the most wonderful example of this. Isn't an aspiration. This exists already here. And just by strengthening the relationship and enlarging, augmenting, and inviting, and transplanting, I think this can be motivated from ourselves. I'm not trying to be a lager mentality or that. I'm not trying to build another silo. But we could strengthen this and not spend so much energy begging some sort of parental figure for attention, wasting our energy there when we could just be getting on with the work. And yeah, that's sort of what I want to say.
Can I reply? I think there are realities, though, Dane, about sustainability, in truth. When there are not-for-profit organizations providing services that legislation says are the rights of South African families and children to access, but the government is not paying for them. Yes. In that respect, we do have a responsibility to leverage what is held within the legal structures of the Children's Act and a whole bunch of progressive policies.
And the obligations of
and the obligations and to hold state account. I think you're right, but we should not be solely funding or asking funders to pay for what our taxes should be paid for.
I think you're quite right. At the same time, if we are going to argue at some stage, I'm not saying we don't ever engage the NHI, but if we are going to argue at some stage about the NHI, we would be in a much stronger position where we can demonstrate our cooperation, our strength, just what you said. Yeah. Can we say how many people have we reached? How sustainable has it been? Now, we're not talking about North America, depression is this, and they show that psychodynamic work really is really good. Neuro proves that an analysis really changes your neural. We will have localized work that is actually adjusted to the South African context. And I think so that's the linkage of the two competing aspects, if that makes sense. Work on the ground and then calling authority to account, which is different from asking authority to make a place for you.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the aim of understanding policy, is that you can leverage of what you really do know of what are rights, what have been formally agreed to.
Yes.
But to implement them is where we need advocacy, I think. And I think it's a very different skills,
yes,
different ways of channeling energy.
So would it be reasonable then, I'm sorry, I might be irritating, but if we agree that the policy and thinking, the theory of what is ideal has been formulated, that now our step is to do pilot implementation, to demonstrate and get it cracking?
I think that we may need to know a bit more about policy to do the research on that. But I think that is the way.
And we have
I am aware that in the last meeting that we had here, SAPC, there was Professor Book here,
yes,
and he's invited us to find a way in to speaking to the government in terms of the implementation, and we haven't followed up some of these things. I would like, maybe by the time we leave here today, maybe to have some kind of a plan to say what is the first step from here, because otherwise we're having these conferences. We are trying to convince people who are already converted here. So from here, what would be the next step, for example? You know, so maybe that's what I think so.
Catherine, what's my
Yeah, I've been invited to be part of a very interesting conversation called, also a dialogue called the Dialogues Forum. I've been funded to participate in this as representing an NGO, but it's a conversation between government, researchers, NGOs, and I raised that's where I got the gap that's not been conveyed to state around the need for therapeutic interventions. They've really seen that there are terrible things happening to women and children in particular, and they haven't seen a coordinated response about how levels of abuse can be managed therapeutically. So I've offered to present something at the next Dialogues Forum in October on a range of therapeutic interventions, and I would like to present on what happened this morning, to speak very much about the communities of care model, Ububele, the IPCP as a dipping into a training, Kanya as being a site, it's derivative from the JPCCC, but see if I can't represent something cohesively with numbers. So I will take responsibility for that. And I think that's to an interesting audience around child work in Gauteng.
So if I could thank you for taking that on, and I mean, if you want help with any of us, just
I will need to have a meeting with everyone.
Just not to overlook it. Sherry is a research psychologist and research a lot of children's organisations. She has statistics, figures. You know, people on quantification, you know, that's it does help. But she has access to that, and if need be, I mean, one of the things we argue, we're going to be employing a researcher starting in Cape Town doing adult work. But I think it would be good to have a researcher who will be able to, you know, either come to the organisation or have their own research anyway, which will show and highlight the importance of this early intervention work. So, in terms of where the SAP is moving, we are moving in this direction. I don't think it's happening. It may be happening slower than we all want, but we also changing. We go now to a group rep meeting. We're going to be looking at our constitution. We're updating it, because we are applying for NPO status and we had to make some alterations to it. So we're very much there, and I think what we appreciate is everybody's input at all the different levels, and your suggestion of to take it forward for us. Having said that, the Department of Health, just let me tell our contact with, when we want to try and get involved in the NHI, people who've been doing it feel there's quite a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted out. So that's what our NHI's committee is doing, is investigating and making contact with government and people who are involved, and policy. So that's been done. But from the conference, and this came from Karen B. Masters, we were connected with the Department of Women, so you do know this. And it is at a government level, it is in their consciousness. They're working towards a non-violent South Africa, violence against women and children. And what they're doing is going through each province and getting involved in all the organizations. They started in Limpopo, they're now going to Mpumalanga. I walked into the organizations. They said the early infant intervention is a Department of Health. There's latest intervention. They like the work, but you saw the response you got, which is, I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think that one needs to be starting early. But anyway, they like the work that was done later, and they have formed a partnership with the FICA. And they started, the work that they particularly liked was the work that was done. Where's Kamal? Yeah, is he still around? So what they liked, you also know, Sherry, they saw fight at the inside, and they were interested in that. But the work that they liked were done with the women who come from these abuse and traumatized situations, where they offer them to sit in a group situation. They do craft work. They talk to each other in the presence of a skilled art counselor. So this ticked all the boxes. We're upskilling them. They can empower themselves financially. They have the support of other women who are in the same situation. And then, of course, there's the containment and understanding of the therapist. So that is the program that they want to roll out. And they're doing some, I don't know where they are with this quite, who follows up, going to Mpumalanga. Sherry was involved. She was sitting down probably doing the research stuff. I saw you sitting with but they are going, and they will eventually come here. They were hoping to get here in October. I think they're a bit delayed. So we sat with the Department of Women. We all went to Pretoria. Sorry, I have to just tell you this. And the Attorney General sat there and she said, well, let me just start this way. How do you eat an elephant? And she said, one bite at a time. So look, it is in their consciousness. And they've got a huge, and they've got no funding, and they've got bad press, and all of that. So when they're forming this partnership, we're in the same situation. We have to fund ourselves. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Sherry, because you've been involved with
In terms of that
Kamal,
process.
the work that's you got.
I know Kunzile has been meeting with them nearly every week for the last few weeks, and she's described it as quite a chaotic move forward with them, but that they are very interested in the particular model that Lafika is providing, because I think of the extent that it involves the community, and it's a community-based approach, and it's very replicable. And they're willing to put a lot of money behind it.
It's a beginning. Okay, but I'm pleased that you've got an in there as well. So I think it's the same thing when you do media. It's just not one thing. It's all the different things that will add up. You know, we can't each take it on. So anybody who's had any contact, media advocacy department or whatever, you know, I think what we need to do is just start pooling it. That's what we're important.
Can I just say one thing, because it's burning inside me? It feels like these are all islands of hope in a country that's under siege. Because if we think about Tuesday and what's happening, and the enormous challenges that we have in our government spaces, I think we've got to just do what we can. We can be outraged that our parents can't see what it should be doing. It's a bit like having a neglectful, disorganized parent. But that, I suppose we can't, as I think Diane referred to, we can't expect this parent to see what we're doing and to support us and to put money into it when they can't actually sustain a government clinic where there's no roof and the staff is, you know, there are few resources. So I just kind of wonder how we think this government's going to be mindful about us when they can't run what's out there at the moment. And I'm emotional about it.
I think it's a very, very valid point. And then we have to really be creative. How do children approach adults? You know, you have a child in an awful situation, children, and one child gets, you know, overlooked and gets hurt and gets angry and gets abused, and another child actually gets what they want. And I think we're going to have to be wily little children as well with these parents.
It's an example where the children actually sort of support each other, and I think that's what we're doing. We're trying to support each other, link arms, and say, okay, let's move forward, and where we can, advocate, shout, where we're given a space.
So then we stay together as the children, as the peers, okay?
Do you know what's been fantastic about that, Mel, being part of that process? There are pockets, there are, like I think this room shows, there are good people working very hard here and there. And I think it's important to hold on to that. They are not necessarily decision makers, but middle and senior people within government that are working hard, that believe in the policies, that are doing what they can to drive things. And it's about finding those allies. It's not all hopeless. And that was very good for me to go and see, because there are good people working hard.
Finding those allies is important because the spaces feel impenetrable sometimes.
So it's linking up. When I was in a moment of despair, one psychologist said to me, for every bad deed in this world, there's a good deed. And you know, it's going to require us to split and to keep in touch with the good, and work together. You know, I think if we hold on to our vision and our hope for the children of the future, you know, we'll
advocate when we can.
Advocate, you know. But I think this is important that we stick together. I think more minds, more hands on deck. Yeah.
I'd like to know, child work isn't my area, so I don't know a lot of things that I'd like to know. But I'm also from KwaZulu-Natal originally, so I know quite a lot about the circles of resources that are in KwaZulu-Natal. And I wonder, isn't it a good time for people that have started to develop the ideal model, best practice models, to make contact with people in other provinces that are also producing good practice models, and that will strengthen, and we can do it through SAPC, because that's supposed to be what SAPC is doing, is facilitating this opportunity for us to meet other people. I mean, unfortunately, we caught between Joburg and Cape Town, and wouldn't it have been lovely to have had Cape Town equivalents here today? And okay, then we start talking about a conference, I suppose. But maybe that's where we go, is to look at what child work is being done nationally. And maybe you all know each other, and you are in continual contact with each other. But I know that there's some super work being done in KwaZulu-Natal, and I wish that they could hear your work and you could hear their work. And it's in that sense that it seems self-defeating for a little person to speak to the great authority, but to be more horizontal at this stage, sort of in a sort of Steve Biko kind of way, to strengthen ourselves first before we are subjected to that other or something like that.
So I mean, this I think is my job as a national group. So I'll pick up some that I've been trying. It has been difficult. The people I have tried at Cape Town, they don't really know me, so I phone and said, would like to be part of the children organisations. The IPCP, we already have a link with Cape Town.
And
for the children.
Insight has moved to Cape Town as well.
Has it? Yeah, so they're going to...
In London, with an organisation called Fight for Peace.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they do similar work to what we do internationally, and we're trying to set up a combined kind of similar kind of project.
Yeah.
Can I say as a starting point then, if anybody knows any organisation or any contact people nationally, to let me know. I have struggled a little bit because I don't know the people as I'm on phone. So if anybody knows anybody anywhere in this country who works with children or children's organisations or NGOs, to let me know. And then, I'm aware we sort of get to the end of time. And then can I, you've got this opening and opportunity now, so that will you link up with the organisations now and get feedback? And then we do have us contact with the Department of Women. So, and I think, can I leave that with you, because they are going to be coming and meeting, or going to each province and meeting the different organisations who are working with abused communities, women and children. So they're very keen to know who's working. They want a partnership with them.
I think the way that the has designed their approach within that process is using community mapping to identify existing resources and structures that are in place, and kind of bolster those and work with those.
And if I can appoint you officially, but you can agree or disagree, to be the researcher for childhood, because you're already doing so much. But maybe we need to know which organisations you're representing. Which
the FICA, Fight with Insight, it was called the Shaken and Abused Baby Initiative, but it's now going to be called Babies Matter. The Joburg Child Advocacy Forum, a little bit of Kids Haven, Gippsland Mountain Bike Academy, there's there's probably a few more that I've forgotten.
So, there are so many resources here which you need to pull, but it probably requires us also another meeting and sitting down and working this out. Do we just leave it now, or do you think we put something in place? Dan, I think it's to coming to the end. What would you like to lead to?
I'm not going to speak. I'd like to hear what any brainwaves that people have or suggestions. How do we take this forward?
That leaflet that was put together, I think, around the first SAPC conference, there was a little booklet of resources.
A handbook.
Yeah, and I just think that there needs to be somebody who constantly draws and unearths the resources and puts them together, and we have a resource directory.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's just one basic
Yes.
way of
That's a hobby horse of mine. Well, what we've done, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've sent out these questionnaires. I don't know if you've filled them in Google questionnaires. Those questionnaires have got lots of different objectives, and one of them is to update your relationships with other your affiliations with other partners like NGOs or anything like that. Having access to that information will then give us the capacity to update the resource handbook. So we're waiting for you to fill out your questionnaire.
Are people doing it? Are they actually responding?
Yeah.
And that's national.
Yeah.
I think we get. I just want to say first of all, just thank you to everybody. Okay, one more in the meeting.
Okay, in terms of the question as to how we take this forward and how does it reach maybe the people on top there, I'm thinking of, I don't know if anyone has attended the Africa Health conference that is every year because of Gallagher Estate. I once mentioned it to Kathy in June, and you know, because I think if one can find a space in that conference to have such presentations, I just don't have an idea as to who to contact for one to get an opportunity to present there.
So thank you for that. Look, there are so many things now. I must say it's quite a vibrant mental health community, and sometimes we stick it in our little silo. So it needs somebody who's a little bit outside to see that and notify us. So there's an SAPC email. You saw it. I mean, this is where it came out. So if people could just be notified, if you could let us know, and we also have a calendar of events. We'll put it on. If you can, so please, people must just let us know. Yeah. We have a monthly calendar of events, and we have extended it now to all the other mental health events that happen in the country. So just let us know about it. If you really want a personal contact, just write your name and say if someone will phone you. I think it's important. We are doing that. So thank you for bringing us to our attention. Okay. Thank you everybody for the presenters. I'm absolutely blown by the work that's been done. So really thank you, all of you.
I know it's been a long morning, but if you can just bear with me, because of the time and also because of this task that I've set myself, to try and summarize and at least draw out what stood out for me today. And I'd like to start off by saying something that has struck me quite a lot. I mean, I'm a Jungian analyst, so I read books called Imagination is Reality. And I must say, I've read the introduction about 10 times, and each time it surprises me, which is a little bit worrying and also a little bit delightful. But in the one passage in this book, in the very first paragraph, they're talking about the transplantation of Eastern methods to Western cultures and how it's supposed to be undoing the ego and actually mistakenly enhancing the ego. But that's not really the main point. Here's the thing that caught my attention, which I think has got a vague application here. Once again, it is as in the old Chinese saying, if the wrong man uses the right means, the right means works in the wrong way. If the wrong man uses the right means works in the wrong way. In effect, it is the Western belief in the right method, irrespective of the man who applies it, that seems to be responsible for the impasse, because method alone
divorced from the psyche, only breeds the delusion of technical omnipotence. Isn't that fabulous? Now, how does that apply to us? We're up against the medical model, which operates according to that kind of one method fits all. And what I've heard and tried to harvest from this presentation today is how each time the method is having to be adjusted to the context where it's being used, and also by the personality that is using that method. Now, this is interesting, and this is where our work, investigating that and being creative with that together, can really develop something that is worth taking to government as a proposal. And until then, I don't think that we're in a very strong position. We're just begging, please just notice us. So some of the things that I thought, firstly at the top of the page, I've written, Desmond Tutu said he was a prisoner of hope, and I also feel like I'm a bit of a prisoner of hope. June spoke about phases of hope. Someone else spoke about islands of hope. Catherine almost spoke about, you were going to say it and then you didn't, but because I'm a therapist, I even know what you don't say. You spoke about pockets of hope, or, you know, you said and then I knew you were going to say pockets of hope. So we're talking about hope. How do we keep it alive? And we keep it alive by being with each other and challenging the structures that insist that we are individual and that insist that we compete with each other and insist that insist that we observe hierarchy, which we are the authorities on mental health. We're it. And I think we need to, not in a ridiculous, arrogant way, but we need to come back to our own power and say, actually, we know what's going on. We'll write it up and we'll dive in and explore this. Some of the things that I thought were interesting and non-traditional in terms of access. By and large, access is needs-based. A few people spoke about that, and with a certain amount of pride said our work is being done on a needs-based approach, which is the traditional ethic of community development. However, there is the non-traditional approach of us going to them. Now this becomes interesting and complicated. By definition, the marginalized are inaccessible. And then we have to look at the complexity of seeking out those that are exiled. Why? We could be paternalistic. It could be seen as pitying. And because our choice of them may amplify how obviously wretched they are, highlighting the stigma and shame which we saw in some of the presentations today. So, an interesting dilemma. We go to them, and we've got to be awake to what that will mean to the person that we are going to. We also need to go to them because through resources and through a sense of self, they won't feel worthy of coming to us, perhaps. So that's about access and the complexity of that. Containment. People spoke a lot about containment. Multi-level containment. Imaginative containment versus resources. The brick mother. Or the rules father. A patch of land swept by parents. Building community in a fractured world, imaginatively. In a fractured world without resources, we can't rely on the fetish of 4 walls and a couch. We've got to use our imagination and the basic fundamentals of what informs that 4-walled container, not the container itself. The container is like the Zen people say, it's the finger pointing to the moon. You don't look at the finger, you look at where the finger's pointing. The container is not the room. Consistency. I was struck by this. somebody said, the parents and child need ongoing contact. There was this idea of peekaboo, are you still there? This is about consistency. Are you gonna be hit and run, or are you gonna still be there? Then it was about what do you do with the exiled, marginalized, with those of the out, and with the orphans of consciousness? How do you encourage linking and thinking and feeling and thickening? And with psychoanalytic eyes, can we see the meanings of actions? So when someone doesn't want a photograph, is it about a photograph? Or is it about a shame that doesn't want to be seen? Because that's the nature of shame, isn't it? Painting of shame will always be hiding the eyes. Trying to see what is there, someone said. This is our discipline. Try and see what is there. Somebody said that. Symbolic versus concrete. Do we give food or not? Do we give symbolic food? Or do we give concrete food? To what extent is giving symbolic food a sort of middle-class bourgeois attitude? And to what extent is giving concrete food sort of becoming too material? Is it the inner world or the outer world? That's what Irene and Kamal were saying. And then the most important thing that caught my attention was something that Catherine was saying. We need to support the gains that we've made. This is slightly non-traditional. As therapists based in an individual, circumscribed model, we do the work and off they go. If we're doing research, we might follow up 40 years later to see if the intervention worked. But here we're having to do something else, support the gains. It's not once off. We have to support local existing structures, Kamal said. We have to support cooperation between our different works. We have to link together pockets of hope. And we have to do what we can. So those are my scattered observations. And I think that we're on the right road to not only doing the work that we do know, but to really start thinking and developing how we're going to adapt and tailor our work to this context in a way which is strong, creative, courageous, compassionate, and cooperative, perhaps is the next C. So that's my little effort. I'd like to thank everybody that organized this event. I'd like to thank Ububele. I'd like to thank you all for coming and sacrificing your Saturday mornings. And keep up the hope. We can do something here. There are good people in this room. We can do something. And let's just keep supporting each other.